Well, good evening, and thank you everybody for coming. Tonight's community conversation we have called Violence Against Women and Girls, Changing the Culture. And I want to welcome our wonderful panel that we've brought together this evening to discuss this really very difficult, complex and vast topic. I want to acknowledge from the outset that what we will be discussing can be quite upsetting, because for too many women and girls, it may bring back traumatic experiences and memories. So we acknowledge that, and we are trying to talk around the subjects as sensibly and carefully as we can, acknowledging that amongst you might be people who have experienced violence and have gone through very traumatic experiences yourself. If you want to share your experiences, of course, we would very much welcome that. But as I say, we are aware of how difficult it is to share experiences in an open forum. So hopefully we will manage to talk around the subjects in a sensitive as possible a way, and try to discuss what we can do to change the culture, to make violence against women and girls something that is a thing of the past. I'm the spokesperson for the Liberal Democrats on equalities and women. I have done a number of things from my bit in Parliament. My private member's bill became a government bill, and now is an act of Parliament around upskirting, making upskirting a specific criminal offence. I want to make misogyny a hate crime because I think it really is an important part of getting to the culture of all of that women and girls experience, not just at the very violent end, but also on harassment and daily life experiences, a whole range of what needs to change. So misogyny to me is at the root cause of many of those experiences of women, but the government is still very reluctant to actually follow that and make misogyny a hate crime for various reasons. We have got the online safety bill, which is coming in front of Parliament, and I also want to see a number of changes that will make the online space safer for women, particularly around intimate image sharing, and that for me is around making it an even more victim-centered crime, so that it isn't about motivation, but it is about the fact that the image is shared without consent, that then leads to a crime that can be evidenced. So there are a number of things that I'm doing from my point of view in Parliament. My latest effort has been the private member's bill about work harassment or harassment in the workplace, which should also make a lot of difference, I hope. But all of these are mini steps, and only together can we make the big steps. And I think that is what today's conversation is going to be about. How can we work together, not just in our own bit, but how can we actually, through partnership, make the big step that will lead to a big culture change to stamp out violence against women and girls. I will interview each of our guests in turn and then open a discussion and a question and answer session at the end. Each of our panelists has about 5 minutes. So let's start with Councillor Dina Romero, who is the Cabinet Member for Children and Young People and Communities on Bath and North East Somerset Council. Welcome, Dina. Very nice to see you. We have worked a lot together. I have come to you first to ask you to set the scene with an overview of what the Council has been doing in the partnership working that you are involved with. Last year, the murder of Sarah Everard galvanized women and girls across the country. What did you and your fellow women in the Council do? What are some of the highlights of local collaboration across different organizations since then? Over to you, Dina.
Thank you very much, Vera, for your introduction. I'd first like to start by expressing my sadness that this week there's been yet another murder of another young woman, Zara Elena. There have been at least 52 murders of women so far this year. Now, that's according to blogger Karen Inglesmith, whose blog, Counting Dead Women, chronicles each death she is aware of. Zara's death is even more tragic, as she and a friend had joked recently that she would continue to walk and would not become a victim. She would not end up dead like Sarah Everard. The abduction, rape and murder of Sarah Everard in March last year was one of at least 136 that year. That horrific attack threw violence against women and girls under a new spotlight. We were all appalled that women and girls not only don't feel safe, but often aren't safe when out. But worse than that, the key message for women and girls is that it is your fault. You need to change your behaviour, dress differently, and don't bring these attacks on yourself. I felt strongly then that this wasn't right, and immediately asked fellow women councillors from across all political parties of Bath and North East Somerset Council if they wanted to meet to talk about what had happened and what we could do. The majority of women councillors wanted to do something. Many had their own stories to share, and so doing something was personally important. We agreed that it is not okay for women and girls not to feel or be safe, nor to feel that attacks and harassments are somehow merited. The Women's Councillor Group worked together to create a cross-party motion which was put to full council on the safety of women and girls in public places. This motion was passed unanimously. In the motion were a series of asks of council to make our streets and public spaces more safe, including those in the process of being developed. These requests range from better or simply sometimes working CCTV, a greater urgency in fixing streetlights, to support for schemes such as Ask for Angela. We were resolute in our rejection that women and girls needed to modify their activities to be safe. We championed the right of women and girls to be protected from violence and harassment. Embedding this within the strategies of the council forces this issue into the council's conscience. As Cabinet Member for Children, Young People and Community, I personally take making Bath and North East Somerset safer for women and girls very seriously. I get involved and I attend a range of groupings, including Bath Bid's Nighttime Economy, the police's anti-hate crime group, and I'm also an invitee on the police's Violence Against Women and Girls group. I've shared concerns from these meetings and others to services within the council, including with licensing, economic development and regeneration, and also planning. The council, though, can only do so much, and we need to work together to make change happen. As a society, we need to take the need for cultural change seriously. Stopping violence against women and girls is everyone's responsibility. Everyone here and not here has a part to play. I am very much looking forward to hearing from the other speakers and the discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Here we go. Thank you, Dina. That was a very good introduction, particularly around the fact that for too long, it's been seen as the women's fault if they get attacked. And that conversation is obviously very big now. Why do we need to protect ourselves when actually, you know, we should, you know, why is it our fault if we get attacked? But it is also true that we need, in the meantime, a lot of protection in terms of that those who do the attacks don't get away with it, because if they do, then they will continue and continue to be perpetrators. And that is obviously a little bit of a sort of two-way thing. First of all, we need to have the conversation about the culture change, but also we still need to have the conversation of what is it that women need to be protected. And both go hand in hand. If too many crimes are just not being prosecuted, and if too many rape victims don't get justice, and that is currently the case, then that is obviously the first starting point that needs to change. We need to have a much better way of getting perpetrators into the courts and getting convictions, so it creates a disincentive. At the same time, we need to have that conversation around why is the violence here anyway. So thank you for sort of setting the scene so persuasively. And we're coming to Alison Herbert now, that you mentioned in your introduction as well. Alison is the Chief Executive of Bath BID, our local business improvement district. Welcome to you, Alison. We have had many discussions in other fora before. You have been a driving force working with businesses that make up your nighttime economy. Please bring us up to speed on the progress you and your partners or partner organizations have made, and particularly sort of mention around sort of what are the protections, but what is also, what can these organizations do to bring about a culture change?
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. So I will just explain what a business improvement district is, because people who aren't involved don't always know. So Bath Business Improvement District is one of about, oh sorry, I'm really next to a noisy train station, is one of about 330, I think it is at the moment, business improvement districts nationally. And basically what a BID is, that's what we call them for short, is a partnership of businesses within a defined geographical area. So in our case, it's Bath City Centre. And so we're a partnership of about just a bit more than 650 businesses, including the high street businesses in the city centre, particularly for today's topic, the nighttime economy businesses. And people might ask, what is a business support organisation doing in this conversation? And whilst our primary focus is about business success, we're all too aware that the safety of people in the city centre is a community and in fact a commercial imperative. And we at the BID want everyone who's using the city centre to feel safe. So we take a kind of three-pronged approach to action in this arena. We deal with actually responding to incidents as they happen, and then trying to support businesses to be part of a community that prevents incidents from happening, and then the wider strategic work with our regional partners to make sure that we change the environment forever, I guess. So if we just, what we've done in the first instance, we have a partnership that we call Safe and Secure, and in supporting businesses who are dealing with people who are vulnerable during the nighttime in the city. We have a team of marshals and a medic who go out on a Friday and a Saturday night and will help people who find themselves in a vulnerable position. And that, obviously that works on two levels. If an incident has happened, then they're there to support the individual, and also their very presence supports the police in creating that message that Bath is a safe place to be and it's a bad place to do bad things. So I think, it's very simple. That's kind of responding to the emergency, I guess. And then what we did at the point, it was all over the news in October, if you remember. There was a lot of reporting about spiking, particularly in Bath, and there was the campaign run by the students about the girls' night in, and obviously that became quite a concern for the businesses in the city, and so we pulled together some training materials working with the police. So we were using our network and their expertise, I guess, which is a great way of working together. And we ran a training event at Comedia that was attended by 80 people. We were absolutely delighted with the turnout, all from the nighttime economy businesses. And we created lanyards and training packs for them to take away to train the staff that weren't there, very much focusing on what to do if a spiking incident happens in your business. And we also provided testing kits, which the police have now picked up, but in the first instance there weren't any available. So we provided free of charge testing kits so that if somebody reported that their drink had been spiked, it could immediately be tested, because one of the problems is, you're left as a publican with a drink that's been abandoned on the counter, and somebody says, oh, I think it might have been spiked. You're just going to pour it away. So there was an education piece to make sure that people were actually testing it so that it could be used as evidence so that we could get the end results that we were looking for. So that's the kind of very practical things we do. And then strategically, I'm absolutely delighted that Chief Constable Sarah Crew invited bids across the region to get involved in her Enough campaign, which is all about everybody coming together to change workplaces and city streets and all of the different education settings and so on, all of the different places where we really need to adapt our way of thinking, I think, to try and make those places safe places for women and girls. And I'm working with a team particularly on safe cities or safe high streets. And there's no one magic bullet, but I think it's really refreshing to work with people from North Somerset and South Somerset and and Bristol, and all come and try and come up with the ideas that will actually make our places safer. So that's how we're involved, and it is a priority for us. It's a very important part of our work.
Alison, can I just sort of ask you, when you're talking, how do we make spaces safer? Obviously, that is for each setting a different answer. But I remember when I was on the council, Dina, you will probably you will echo that. When we look at our parks, the way planting is done, whether you've got very dense hedges or whether you've got in parks more open, more transparent ways of getting through it. That's one way, obviously, in our green spaces. But what would you say, for example, in city centres, what is there that where you hear where women say we would feel safer if? Is there an example that you could give? Olivia, I think you have to.
Yeah, no, I can do it now. Thank you. So it's really interesting. I mean, and I don't know if this is a very cynical thing to repeat, but at that conference, they said no amount of lighting is going to dismantle the patriarchy, which is perhaps a controversial thing to say in this group, but that was something that came up in that violence against women and girls conference. But in practical terms, it's quite interesting. Lighting is the obvious thing. But it's also about really understanding your city centre. So I could go around and say, well, I think that light's not bright enough, or whatever. That's a bit of a dark corner. I think it's really important to listen to how people use city centres, and quite often it's not that one street is really dark, it's that the street before it is actually really bright. And so what people respond to is a change in lighting, and that can make them feel nervous. But there are kind of simple interventions, but like the way that you place park benches, there are not park benches, but benches for people to sit down in the city centre. There are ways that are less alarming than other ways. I was speaking to somebody recently who's an expert in city centre public realm kind of installations, and she really approves of what we've got in Bath, the circular benches in Union Street, because a single woman can sit on one of those benches and not have to make eye contact with somebody that might make her feel vulnerable. So actually circles are quite well recognized, and if you put benches face to face, then the opposite thing happens. So putting benches slightly staggered so that you don't have to make eye contact with the person opposite you, or you can avoid making eye contact, is that. But in the end, a lot of this is about one's personal perception of safety, and it is actually quite difficult, which is why you need to do a lot of listening, I think. So if the magic solution, it would be great. But the other thing I've read in kind of place management theory is that one of the most significant things that makes people feel unsafe in a city centre is litter. So
interesting. Dina, take note and report that back. Maybe you're aware of that, but that's very interesting, isn't it? That you say litter. I mean, we've all heard of the broken window syndrome, haven't we? Where you think if something looks a little bit neglected, then people add neglect to that. Whereas if spaces look as if they've been looked after and kept clean, that creates immediately an environment of more secure places. it might be around that. I don't know. Or have people said what it particularly is around litter, or do they fear that there might be needles in it, or is actually the litter itself causing the alarm? It's an interesting question, isn't it? But anyway, you again gave us a very interesting insight into what you can do, so hopefully in our question and answer session, maybe we can more sort of bring out more of what you've sort of touched upon. So our next speaker is Alexandra Scott-Warren, chair of the women's group at Bath Spa University. Welcome, Alexandra. It's nice to see you here, and welcome to the panel. Bath's thousands of university students are an important part of our community, so I'm really very pleased to have a student voice presented this evening. You have campaigned against drink spiking and have worked hard with your fellow students, male and female, to stamp this out. Alison has already mentioned it, what can be done with actually businesses here. And it's really good to hear your insights. Over to you.
Okay, so hello, I'm Alexandra. I'm chair of the women's group at Bath Spa University. And this year especially, we've been focusing on violence against women and particularly spiking. We were part of the group that organised Bath Night In and set up kind of the precedent in order to do things like that about what we wanted to see improved within nightclubs and making sure that things like anti-spiking devices were available. So we made sure that we had anti-spiking devices at the university that people could get for free, and we raised money in order to do that and have that be available for everyone. We also put pressure on our mental health and wellbeing services team in order to provide more emotional relief and create wellbeing groups for students who maybe had been spiked or experienced violence. So they had spaces to speak with people which were safe and more accessible, especially for students. I worked very closely with other people at my university as sabbatical officers in order to change some of the contracts that the nightclubs have around spiking. So looking at what they can do to actually take accountability for when spiking incidents do happen. And on top of that, we raised concerns about maybe with things like extra surveillance or having stop and search in order to try and reduce spiking actually isn't always the best idea because it leads to marginalised groups getting targeted. So we've been looking at that as well. So there are a lot of factors, especially within spiking, that contribute towards it. But the main thing that we've been looking at is being how people are educated around it, and specifically how a lot of men think that that kind of behaviour is okay because they have not been educated to think otherwise, which is what actually leads to spiking in the first place. And it's about finding the root of that behaviour and going back and actually trying to diminish it and stop it from happening in order, instead of putting the blame on women and saying that spiking is only a women's issue, because it's not. 1 in 9 women get spiked, but also 1 in 17 men get spiked. It's not just a female issue. And although predominantly spiking is done by males, it's on them to actually have to try and educate themselves about why that isn't okay and why that behaviour is actually being enabled at some point. And that obviously leads back to our culture and how we educate men into what's okay and what isn't okay. And basically we just need to be looking more about how we can target earlier on to educate, rather than waiting until they get to university where this kind of thing is prevalent among students. So yeah, that's what I've been doing.
So it sounds absolutely fascinating. Can you sort of maybe tell us a little bit about, you know, your successes so far? So when you said you created these groups, you know, do people really, you know, welcome them and take advantage? How many people have been to the to those groups? Is it then predominantly women who come to the groups, or are men also coming and actually welcoming the debate around consent, for example?
Yeah, so at Bath Spa, the population is predominantly female, so we do have less male voices anyway. But especially with when we did Bath Night In, we had the boycott, we held that at the uni, and everybody came along and we all just had a night in, had some pizza and just kind of talked instead. And actually the bar ended up being completely full, and it was both male and female. It was quite equal balance. So it was really great to see that it wasn't just the fact that they'd come along, but actually there were men happy to talk about the issue and how some of them had actually been affected by it as well. So yeah, it was really good to see lots of different people coming together to actually see how it has impacted people, because you look at the statistics and you think, well, it's just a bunch of numbers, but then you have to realize that those numbers are actually people. And unfortunately, I am one of those people who have been spiked. So, you know, I look at the numbers and one of them is me. So it's definitely important to humanize the issue as well. Like, it's not just, you know, this many people get spiked and like this many people experience violence because of it. It's real people with real experiences, and I feel like too often that gets forgotten. So to organize these events where people can come together, and especially to see it be so successful with more than 100 people there, was just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, well done. And as I've said at the very beginning, it's very brave to have come through an experience like this and then sort of come out at the other end and speak on behalf of people who have been victims of a violent attack or spiking, you know, any traumatic experience like this. To turn that around is very difficult, and the courage of people like you has to be admired. And I do really admire what you're doing and helping others, because unless we, you know, really get these sort of horrific, vile offences into the open, that's the first step in order to stamp them out. What I would like to sort of understand a little bit more, because I think this discussion is going to go increasingly around, you know, we as women, our panel is dominated by women, but I hope that we also have a male, you know, men in the audience, and we, of course, have got Ronald with us as well to speak later on. But when we have the male voices here, what could you summarize a little bit what they're saying when they're confronted with these issues?
Yeah, so a lot of the time I found that they feel guilty about it, even if they haven't had anything to do with it at all. They always take accountability because they feel like it's being put on them to be responsible for it, which is unfortunate because, you know, if they haven't taken in that at all, then it shouldn't be on them at all. But it's kind of sad in a way to have all these men come in and say that they're here to support it, but a lot of the time they also say that they don't understand the issue fully. And I think that is another problem with it. They don't understand how women can feel unsafe because of spiking and things to do with that. And it's about, with those spaces, telling them our experiences and saying, well, this is how we felt, so they can actually try and understand it. That is really important. And I know that a lot of the people I've spoken to, they've come in maybe apprehensive because they don't know much about it, and they've actually left with a better understanding. And I think that's a really important thing that we need to be doing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's no good sort of creating massive divisions. It's about bringing the conversation into the room with all sides in the room, in order to create better understanding amongst each other. And I'm glad to hear that that's really what you're working on. Well, thank you for that, Alexandra. It's really interesting to hear from you, and hopefully we hear a little bit more from you later in the Q&A session. I would now like to welcome Talia Nassir, who's the Deputy Manager of Labyrinth Nightclub in Bath. Hello. So we can hear directly from you. You've obviously already heard from Alison and now the student voice. Please help us to understand your perspective and what actions your business is taking to ensure that everybody who comes into your premises and enjoys the night out, and that's obviously what you really want. You want people to feel safe, to have a great time. What can you do to keep them safe so they can enjoy themselves safely?
Am I muted or am I okay? Am I good? Yeah, okay, fine. So my name's Talia. I've been the deputy manager at Labyrinth since it reopened as Labyrinth last July, I believe. If you're from Bath, you'll probably know that we are an extremely popular nightclub, especially with the students, predominantly students. And I do have something to say about the whole boycott thing in a minute, but I'll come on to that. But from my perspective, from the club that I work in, we've always gone above and beyond right from the very beginning to do with safety, both male and female. No sort of violence of any kind or anything like that has ever been tolerated, and it never will be, whether that's towards customers or our staff members. We actually, through Monday through Thursday, we actually employ an external medic that we have on site for our club. So if we need it at all, we have one of our own. Obviously, we do have the street marshals and the, I'm going to say this wrong and I'm going to get told off. Are they the city marshals now? Sorry, city pastors.
The street pastors, they're called.
Pastors. I know they get really upset when you say it wrong. We have those as well. Obviously, we have them on a Friday and a Saturday, but Monday through Thursday, when they're not on, like we have our own medic. All of our staff are aware of the Ask for Angela course. They're fully briefed on that. So I think it's been used maybe once or twice. So that's been really effective for the training for that. Because we're a student venue, obviously we have a lot of contact with the security services it's mainly the University of Bath, because they have the scheme for the students where, you know, if they're available, they can come and take them back if they're able to. We do promote the safe taxi scheme, which I believe Alison, you'll know about, and Dina, you'll also know about. We do have a few issues with that, but I think that was brought up in the Bath bid meeting before, where there's been quite a few incidences where even though it's been quoted as a safe taxi scheme, it hasn't actually worked. As far as the spiking and things go, we do have our own spike testing kit. So if anything does get mentioned or anybody is worried about it, we can self-test whilst they're there. It sort of brings me on to the boycott. I do understand the reasoning for the boycott, but from to me, it just seems like it was a thing to damage businesses that were already trying and from the beginning had already had these things in place. Like, for example, when there was issues with getting the bottle stop caps and things like that, we'd already been using cling film. We've been doing this from the start. You know, we'd already put things in place to make sure that our customers knew that we were already aware of things, and just like not preempting, but just so they knew. But I feel like with the boycott, it was more of an attack on all of these businesses rather than a conversation that could have been had before. Instead of just the instant, you know, boycott everything. But the other thing I found interesting was that you also said that the bar at the university was kept open and the bar was drank dry. And I don't really understand, if you were boycotting bars and things, why you would keep the bar at the university open, because what was to stop anybody from spiking anybody at the bar at the university? It just, I don't know, to me that just feels a bit like it was a bit personal on all the bars and clubs around Bath that were already trying. But from our perspective, you know, we do everything that we possibly can. We employed a here to help female that we had, Kelsey, who's actually now the assistant manager as well. And she was there constantly. She was always helping girls. I mean, I think she's probably, from her records, I think she's probably helped over 300 students, mainly females, you know, get home. She's making sure that they're safe. If there's any problems or anything, you know, she's always there. So yeah, we pretty much do as much as we possibly can. You know, all of our security on briefed or anything. We have a lot of repeat customers that come in. They know our security, they get on with our security. You know, nobody's worried about going up to them and saying, you know, we've got a problem, can you help me? So in my view, I'm very proud of the things that we do at this venue. And obviously, if there's always room for improvement, if there's anything else that is brought up and any suggestions that we can do that makes it better, then I'm more than open to talking about it. But I think what we do already is above and beyond what a lot of places do, and I'm really proud of that.
Well, thank you, and well done for putting in improvements. I mean, tonight, I think the conversation isn't about sort of you're bringing people into the room to sort of start the conversation. And if I understand correctly, what Alexandria is trying to do, first of all, she was a victim of spiking, so I think
so have I been. I have myself when I was about 18, so about 10 years ago. So no, I have been myself. So no, I understand the point.
Yeah. So it is, of course, you know, and different people react different to have been a victim. I think we all need to acknowledge that, of course, it is a horrific experience, and I'm sorry that you too have been a victim of spiking. And that, of course, then brings people to the point where they want to change culture and raise awareness of the issue. And obviously, it's great to see that businesses like yours have have made the changes, but we probably need more. And the conversation here is not just about how we protect you know, women from these vile offences, and how, you know, you can say we get them into taxis, we get them home, but why does it happen in the first place? Yeah, why do women need that sort of protection? And where can we start the conversation around behavior that is just unacceptable, whether that's against women, but as we've already heard, and you know, there've been have been this horrible news story about young gay men who have been victims of spiking and have been murdered. It's not just women, as we know. So the whole of this sort of environment where this is possible, that we talk about it and change culture. I think that is very much where we're trying to be, rather than sort of trying to blame. Yeah.
An age demographic on it as well, because you know, when I'm working at the club and things like that, I'm more surprised when a female turns around and starts, you know, being aggressive or something like that. It's not unusual for a male to be aggressive towards me upstairs, and it's difficult because it's not like the younger lot, the 18, 19-year-olds, but it's also not the, I don't want to say older, but you know, the older, the demographic, who are like 30, 40, but it's also not the sort of in the middle. It's kind of everyone. So I don't really know where it stems from, but it's definitely a conversation that needs to be had. I don't know, maybe making students more aware from it, like right from the offset, of like, you know, like this is the etiquette, this is how you need to behave when you go out. You might be away from home, like, you know, your parents might not be here, but you know, you still have to act appropriately and respectfully, just as you would, you know, to your own family.
Indeed, and it's a bit of a balance. Of course, you know, people are having a good time and go a little bit over the top, and you know, nobody wants to be an absolute spoil sport. But it's, you know, I speak as a liberal Democrat, so you can have your freedoms, you can do as much of your thing freely, unless you harm somebody else. So to make to make the person aware of that you can harm and cause harm, I think that is a conversation that needs to be had. And today we are talking about violence against women and girls, but of course it's not just women, it's of course also other people who can become a victim of crime, sometimes because people are actually going out and want to perpetrate a crime, and sometimes because it's done thoughtlessly. And therefore the conversation needs to start very early in schools as well, around, so what is acceptable behavior that allows me to have fun while not harming somebody else. And these conversations probably need to start very early on, as Alexandra has said. You know, by the time somebody comes to university, maybe that's already too late. And you know, parents need to have that conversation with their children. We need to have the conversations in schools as well. And we need to have that conversation throughout the ages, as you say, Natalia. It's surprising that it's not just, young people who are behaving badly because they're, for the first time they're outside their parents' control, it actually continues, and therefore it is a societal conversation that we probably need to keep having around, you know, having fun, but doing it in a way that respects the other person and certainly stops short of where you harm somebody else. Let's move on. Ursula, you are our next speaker. You are the Chief Executive of Voices, a survivors-founded charity in Bath, specializing in domestic abuse recovery. We have done a lot of work together, Ursula, and I'm so honored that you come to this panel today to speak about your work and the vital services that your team provides. Please broaden our understanding of domestic abuse and the culture that enables it, and how we can support recovery, and especially how can we start to begin that it doesn't even happen in the first place. Ursula, over to you.
Thanks very much, Vera. So I founded Voices with a group of other women who with experience of domestic abuse 8 years ago. Before that, we were a community group in the area called Seeds Bath. So domestic abuse is one of those crimes of violence against women and girls that thrive on silence, and hence our name Voices, and also why I am very pleased to be part of this with the other panelists, to initiate this conversation and keep the conversations going about this vital topic. So culture matters. You can have a culture of kindness, a culture of tolerance, or a culture of impunity, a culture that fails those most in need of community support, or one that holds them and holds their voices in mind and values their experiences and insights. Domestic abuse is a community problem. It's about community safety. It's about public health. It's about our education and values. It's also about the efforts we as a community need to make to really learn and understand how domestic abuse works and how unhealthy relationships affect people, their families, friends, communities. Voices believe that to do this effectively, you need to involve the people who have experience. We need to listen to women and girls' experiences of violence and abuse and the insights they have about how to stop it happening to others. Voices provides a platform for this to happen, working with national charities, researchers and policymakers, and also in Bath and North East Somerset with partners here. So what we do at Voices is to address the whole picture of domestic abuse experience, not just the visible tip of the iceberg. What commonly appears above the surface are the events and crises that emerge from a whole pattern of abusive and unhealthy behaviour. This might involve violence, damage to property or pets. It might involve the police or health or social services. However, behind this event, there might be years of invisible but damaging behaviours, coercive control, financial abuse, sexual abuse. Understanding how best to support people experiencing domestic abuse or how to intervene effectively with those who perpetrate it means learning about these patterns of behaviour and how they affect us. At Voices, we provide the Freedom Programme to help victims and survivors identify abusive behaviours for themselves and the beliefs that underpin them. These beliefs are also a question of culture, of misogyny and inequality that impact women and generate violence against women and girls. Because we believe that an A&E model of domestic abuse services is too limited to ever produce sustained change and recovery, we also provide a further programme called the Recovery Toolkit. We support access to legal advice and debt and income management. We run a hardship fund supported by NatWest to support clients who cannot access help and for whom small grants can make a world of difference and promote recovery. We look at how mental health has been affected by often years of abuse and provide specialist counselling. So what have we learned from working with people over long time periods, from the earliest help to avoid or safely leave an abusive relationship onto recovery work, including from historic abuse, is that there are many reasons why people stay and why people struggle to recover after separation. We know that the period of greatest risk for a victim of domestic abuse is at the point of leaving, and also that abuse often doesn't stop and may become worse after separating. Just as it's important to understand patterns of manipulation and coercive control in a relationship, we need to recognise the signs of post-separation abuse, stalking and harassment. The problem of violence against women and girls, which often takes the form of domestic abuse, is so widespread it's still so underfunded and under-acknowledged. It's taking place across all social strata and in private and public situations, as well as online. We need a real investment in domestic and sexual violence and abuse services, but also in training and education, as Alexandra mentioned, about responding effectively and working with children and young people to promote healthy behaviours. Obviously, working with students is key. And then we need a far better understanding of intersectional issues of race, faith, age, disability, and so on. For example, thinking about disabled women are 2 times more likely to suffer from domestic abuse or assault and rape, but much less likely to be able to access domestic abuse services, and about 5 times less likely to be referred for high-risk support. So people tell us that they want long-term, person-centered support, advocacy with other agencies so they don't have to tell their story over and over again, and support with the most difficult challenges. They tell us they want help after separation and for people to understand the challenges they face and the continuing risks they face from perpetrators or their family members. Women and girls face specific challenges and often want specific help. Women-only spaces and therapeutic groups, support with their safety and freedom from stalking and harassment, including cyber stalking, and the uses of technology to track their movements and curtail their freedoms. They want healthcare workers to understand the impacts of abuse on their mental and physical health, and for social care and court psychologists to stop pathologizing their concerns for child victims faced with having to spend time with an abusive parent. Community help can involve people at the top of policy making, working with survivors and organisations like Voices to provide effective responses. And it can also be people supporting people in their communities to live safely. Safe Lives, the national charity that we work with, have campaigns developed with survivors, including Reach In and Your Best Friend, helping the community to reach into survivors who they feel might need help, rather than expecting people living with abuse to reach out. And Your Best Friend focuses on what kind of relationship you would want for your best friend, to explain what unhealthy behaviours might be, and work with young people to look at these and change the conversation around abuse and healthy and unhealthy behaviours. And we, like Safe Lives, are calling for a national perpetrator strategy with appropriate funding to really focus on those who cause harm and not only those who seek to avoid it. And lastly, the community can help by supporting local organisations working in this area, including Voices, but including others too, to work with more people and to help improve policies and services in our area. So we really welcome this initiative to bring this issue to the public, and very much hope that others on the call are inspired to do the same. Violence against women and girls and domestic abuse is a whole community issue, and it needs whole community support to change. Thank you.
Thank you, Ursula. Over your 8 years of working, can you sort of point to some hope and some progress in terms of, you know, obviously you're supporting women, and it's obviously, we know more and more it is something that's unfortunately very widespread, and it keeps repeating itself. But is there any progress that you can see in terms of, you know, other incidents, fewer incidences, more understanding, better support, or is it just the same, is it even getting worse in terms of support?
I think it's a really mixed picture. I think that it is increasingly difficult for services to meet demands for in this area. I think I would like to be positive, and I'm positive about the opportunities we have. I think there's far more understanding now that you need to work with lived experience. You need to look at what the data is telling you, which I think is really important at a policy level. I think there's far more public understanding and awareness that this is a problem. You know, many journalists have done amazing work actually in this area to cover and really go into depth about what's actually happening. But I do think, as we hear from the students, you know, that this is a really widespread and profound problem that we do need to tackle. And I think we're a bit behind the curve in terms of teachers being empowered to work with young people enough people really understanding the dangers and developments in the uses of or misuse of technology, issues around financial abuse and so on. We do need, unfortunately, to do far more to educate the public and to educate professionals, empower professionals, I'd like to say, because I don't really want to just criticize. I think it's very difficult for local authorities, it's very difficult for professionals, and it's obviously difficult for individuals to tackle this problem. And as Dina said, we need to work together. I just think we have to be very smart, and we have to be determined and as open as we can to learning. So I think we have a lot to do. We need to listen to the young people more. I think that's another big thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, a very important insight. So a little bit of hope in terms of that, at least we're talking about it more. But
I think so.
But that's not enough, because there's now a huge amount of demand out there. And also often by the time you have a perpetrator and a victim, it's already too late. So, you know, how can we start earlier? And that brings me a little bit towards, you know, talking about what is happening in schools. And I keep saying that I used to be a secondary school teacher, not for the whole of my career, but for a while. So I understand a little bit of what is going on in schools. And I think the problem I have is that, let's say, relationship education is sort of left to some sort of last thing in the afternoon, when young people want to go home anywhere, don't really listen, and it's been done by, let's say, the modern foreign languages teacher rather than actually experts in the field. And I think one of the things that I think is so important, that if we recognize how important relationship education is, then let's just a math teacher do that. Yeah, not that they shouldn't also know, but they are obviously real experts in the field, and schools need to have the resources and the time, and take it seriously, to really get relationship education right. It would actually make a lot of difference. But I think currently within the education sector, this is not fully recognized how important that is. Let's bring it to our last speaker. Thank you again. Also, really, you know, insights from your field and how much more we need to do. But we come to our last speaker today. What did Olivia said at the very beginning? He's our top cop now in Bath, Ronnie Lungu, who's the Chief Inspector in Bath. Very warm welcome to you, Ronnie. We have spoken last week, I think, because you're still very new to Bath, and I'm so pleased and so honored that you made time this evening to speak to us about your perspective from the police, and what you think needs to be done. Help us understand the latest police thinking on violence against women and girls. I know that Avon and Somerset Police has taken a great initiative and organized a massive conference around it. So I know that Avon and Somerset Police takes the issue very seriously, and we would like to hear from you and your team in Bath.
No, thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me. I think, like you said, I'm still new in the role, but this is literally, it sounds like a cliche, but one of my priorities as well. So when I took on this job in Bath, I just come up from a national program where I got it firsthand on what policing was doing in reaction to this program and the importance of it. We've come a long way. There's still a lot. I mean, listening to Asula talk about it now, and I remember talking to my colleagues who have been in the job for a long time, talk about domestic violence not being investigated because it was a domestic issue. And now we've moved on to where we are, where we've got coercive behavior, which actually that legislation came during my time as well. So there's a lot of work that has been done nationally, and there's a lot of work that's being done locally as well. I think, like you mentioned, we're privileged in Avon and Somerset having Sarah Crew, who's the national lead for the rape and serious sexual offences for the Chiefs Council. So we've kind of like had things in place, and that's one of the cultures which is being built. And obviously putting together a conference is understanding that we can't do this on our own. We need partners to help us out. So in Avon and Somerset, we've kind of like taken on the national priorities, which is main one really is to improve trust and confidence within policing. We need victims to know that when an offense occurs, they can report that to the police, and something is going to be done about that. So that's one of the priorities that we're working on. Then the other one is creating safer space. And to me, this is one that's really important, especially for Bath, is ensuring that the university students that we spoke about feel safe to have their time. I'm at a stage now where my kids are at university, and as a father, it's kind of like wanting to know that they are safe out there as well. So that's a priority that we've got. But going back to the collaboration aspect of it, is when we're creating a safe space, we're not going to be doing it on our own. It's understanding that there's people like Alison with her team who will be able to be our eyes and ears on the ground and work with us. We just recently launched what we call the Street Safe tool, which is a government-driven tool, which kind of like works as a barcode, which you can barcode to identify areas where you've actually haven't felt safe or areas that you feel safe. So that will be collected into a database and would allow people that if you're not feeling safe, there is somewhere where you can go or somewhere where you can avoid, which I deliberately use that word avoid, because for me, there is this whole drive of what, especially females, if you look at it that way, have to avoid to do, try not to walk on those dark places, try not to get too drunk, try not to do that. And instead of driving the challenge to the perpetrators, the people that are causing those offenses, because women should be changing their way of living in order to feel safe. So to me, we still got a long way to go. And again, I think everybody touched on the issue of education. That's one that needs to come in. And as a man, I think I'm part of that problem. I need to be part of that solution as we move forward. I think I always talk of things like being an upstander, being an advocate for race, is having allies are the people that's going to help. So for me, when I relate it to race, where I always think I need the majority to be the one that's going to be my voice, because I can't fix my own problems. And I think as policing, we're taking that on as part of the education, working with the PCSOs, understanding that we've got to educate our male counterparts on that. And one thing that obviously is policing is relentlessly pursuing our perpetrators. Again, that links into the confidence, because that's the main part for me. So if we target the perpetrators, not just punishing them and putting them away, but that education piece, starting from school, like we said earlier, but let's move it all the way, ensuring that people understand. So I'm working with British Transport Police to ensure that we've got areas, we've got operations that we're running, Operation COP, which is obviously nighttime economy. Then we've got another operation that we're working on, which actually is going to be used mostly by plainclothes officers. So what we're doing is we're getting those plainclothes officers going into nightclubs, into pubs, and if they can see a behavior, they can highlight to the officers who are in uniform outside, and people will be surprised when they're being stopped, checked, or looked into them to find out who they are. And so to me, it's ensuring that that happens every time in Bath. We're not going to be announcing the exact date and time when it's going to be happening, but we need that to be a culture then to people to start thinking like, actually, if you go to Bath, there might be plainclothes officers within the nightclubs, and we're actually working with that. So I would welcome an opportunity to work with Alexandra as we move forward, because we would need some people that will be working with us as eyes and ears to improve that promotion that we're working on. So for me, there's a lot going on, and as the new guy in town at the moment, which is what I've spent a lot of time doing, is meeting new people, speaking to people like Dan Romero, understanding exactly what goes on within the city and looking at how we can improve it moving forward. So just to reassure the audience, obviously, this is a priority, it's a national priority, it's a first priority. it is a priority within Bath, and there are a lot of initiatives that are being implemented, but at the moment it's just listening to people and understanding.
Thank you, Ronnie. Well, our audience has been very patient listening to obviously 6 very different parts of bringing the conversation alive. It's now over to you guys. So I understand that Olivia has been looking at questions in the question and answer box. Olivia, do you want to sort of ask the first question on behalf of our audience?
Yes, Vera, thank you everyone for your questions. We'll try to get through as many as we can. I will try to group them if I may. I mean, one fundamental issue that we've heard, and certainly the panel has referred to it, education. You know, we're talking about prevention, and you know, when somebody goes to university, for example, but several panelists have said, for example, someone wrote in, I'm a counselor and a teacher. How do we think we can get the message across in schools from a young age? Boys need educating to become the men that wouldn't even think of doing, you know, of committing any sort of violent or disrespectful act against women. And if I can add another point onto that, is that of course, it's not only children that need educating, but their parents and families. So that's a very big topic. Vera, is there someone you'd like to direct that to first off?
Well, I'd like to hear from Alexandra to see what she can add to that, or help us get to maybe a little bit of an answer. You know, should that be an education where families as a whole are being invited to participate, or is it in schools boys and girls together, or is it boys on their own, or how do you think from your experience that might work to start that conversation and that education part? Olivia, can you unmute her?
Yeah, Max, can you help me with that?
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one thing that I've been looking at personally, which would be at university level, but could be something that went trickle down to lower schools as well, would be bystander training. That's been a big thing that we've been looking at. And obviously, in order to do that, we do need to get people in from the community. So getting someone like Ronnie to come in and talk about that would be like a brilliant starting point for something like that.
Can I just ask you, Alexander, what is bystander training? Because I see that Ursula is nodding, and I don't think I've heard of that.
Yeah, so basically we're looking at educating people about what to do in these situations, and you know, if you are a bystander and you're witnessing something happening, what you should be doing in that, because obviously if you do see something happening to someone, you should be there stepping in, you should know what to do in that situation. In the same way that if somebody hurt themselves, you're going to go over and you're going to call them an ambulance. It's that kind of thing that you're doing. But in terms of violence, in terms of if you think someone's being spiked, you approach them and say, you know, don't drink that. I think someone spiked it, you can then go get it tested. That's the kind of things that we need to be encouraging people to do rather than just observing it and letting it happen. And obviously that's much more prevalent once you kind of get into like the night scene and going out, like that's only something to do with that. But especially with younger children, just being aware of that and maybe what they should be doing in that situation as well, even if it isn't affecting them yet, is something that is important to kind of educate them on about early, as well as the consequences of committing these kind of actions, because there are consequences for it and a lot of people just aren't aware of them, and they just need to be basically reiterated to younger people so they can actually understand them fully, rather than just brushing them off.
Talia, can I just sort of ask you, do you think bystander training is something that you as a business could support or even encourage, or are you doing something like this already?
just typing something about that. Yeah, I do agree with it, because it would be obviously very helpful for people to, understand what to do, because, a lot of people go into almost like a shock when they see something like that happening. They don't know what to do, they don't know how to react, which is understandable, because it's not an everyday like situation that people get into, and people don't always know, the best way to react. The only thing that I would say with that as well is, within that sort of like training and telling people like what to do with things and getting involved in like an external situation to them, I presume that they would also be, told of the risks of themselves getting involved in that situation, because you don't know these people, you don't know who they're with, you could also be placing yourself at risk by getting involved in that situation. So I think if you were going to go down that route of, you know what's the word, like educating people on how to get involved in that situation, I think you also need to be careful of educating them of how that situation could also be a risk to themselves. But no, I do think it's a good idea.
I think Talia, and I go to Ronnie here. You probably can echo what Talia has just been saying. And you as a police force, you know what can happen if people then get involved in a dangerous situation. And I'm sure you would probably agree, wouldn't you?
Absolutely, and I think for me it's that education that links in with going back to the basics. When you're telling a child when you lost, go and see the uniform, especially with nightclubs, I'll be thinking, instead of putting yourself at risk in that confrontational situation, speak to the door staff, speak to authority. There will be police officers outside, there'll be street marshals. So I think there is that, but I think the concept is not just doing nothing doesn't work at the moment anymore. Just watching it, because it's about changing that culture, what's acceptable. And as a man, I think we take the education more in a structured policy way. I think there's personal responsibilities as well. As a father, I need to think of it and bring it back home and think of my kids. I've got personal experiences of my daughter when she was at university, phoning me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, walking back to her flat. Tired I was, but I had to talk to her all the way until she got home. To me, that was learning. If I could create a society where I didn't have to get that phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning because I knew she was safe, then that would be a better society to live in. But some other parents get the worst phone call. So to me, I think that education is about people reflecting on what goes on at home and understanding that as men, there are some privileges. As a police officer, there are some privileges that are going to take advantage of, but ensuring that other people don't have that. So that education isn't just from the young people, it's all the way to adults in cultures, in organizations, as we're doing. I talked up earlier about cultures. You talk about internal and external culture. It's that education. So having the publicity out there, having the conversation out there, and having robust policies to protect people, I think that'll be the way forward.
And I take your point definitely about the bystander training, Alexandra. Sounds a great idea, and one should sort of really think around how to make that happen. Olivia, what's our next question?
I'll just follow on from this as a footnote about teenagers, and someone's raised the issue about can there be more safe places for teenagers in our community to be together?
Who should we direct this question to?
Yeah, I think this is a community, and certainly, Vera, you and I have heard this speaking into local councillors. Again, Ursula, I don't know if you would want to offer anything on that. And then possibly Ronnie.
It's a question around sort of where can young people go? Is that
has consideration been given to safe spaces for teenagers to be together socially?
Well, I think that's probably best directed to Dina. Dina, you're probably
okay. Yes, of course, Dina.
Services and what's being done, or what more could be done. I think unfortunately, a lot of council money funding has been cut that go into youth services. And I think this conversation probably brings out again how important they are. Dina, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I agree with you, Vera. I think, one of the real tragedies of, council work today is so much that you would want to do can't be done in the ways that it previously was done. And at the moment, our youth services are by and large targeted work. But, there are perhaps other partners, other players that, we and indeed our youth services can work with to try and ensure that young people do have safe places to be. And one of the interesting questions that constantly is asked, and is also it says it is about young people. They hang around because they haven't got anything to do, but actually when you talk to young people, actually what they want is just to be. And so having somewhere to be that is safe, I think, is something that we collectively need to ensure. But we also need to, as a society, get that having young people together isn't inherently, a bad thing. It's, that is just a stage of people's lives, and many of us ourselves will have gone through that that phase as well. So I think there's a number of things within that one is a recognition by us all generally that young people gathering together is not going to necessarily be a bad thing, and also finding places where people can be, that where young people, teenagers particularly, feel safe. Can I also come back to the other question that you were talking about education? Because there's clearly a role that schools must play in this as well, particularly around educating boys and young men, but also in educating girls and young women about what is can be, what is appropriate, what is expected, what is how we can make our society and our communities better. And it is something that I wonder, and this is a bit of a question back to you, Vera. I note that the white paper on education is out at the moment. I don't think there's very much in it about PSHE, but it ought really to be something that is within that.
Can you just sort of explain to our audience who might not be in the jargon what PSHE is? I mean, most of you might know, but
bother, I was worried you were going to ask me that. It's about I'm going to say personal, I was going to say it's about certainly health, personal safety. It's about kind of a bit of sort of sex education as well. So there's a whole range of things that are in that. So it is, and I apologise for using a bit of jargon there, but I do think
what I referred to earlier, what is done in the afternoon by any sort of teacher. Some schools do it very well, but it's a sort of general education that is not math and English and chemistry. It's bringing young people have awareness about financial security, about relationships, about about sex, about health, but all of that is sort of crammed often into the school day on a Tuesday at 3 o'clock before the young people are going home. And some schools do it very well. I haven't seen it been done very well. And I think what you're saying, Dina, and I quite agree, there should be a much bigger piece of recognition around how important the education around that is. And that's when I said earlier, I think these lessons should be actually delivered, certainly when it comes to relationship education, should be delivered by proper specialists in the field, rather than leaving it to harass sort of German teacher to think, oh my God, I have to do that. I see that Ursula has put her hand up, so you obviously want to join in here.
I just wanted to, well, a couple of things. I was thinking about the fact that there is that age group that is sort of falling often between the gaps in services from sort of 12 to 15. And also that there's a role for mentors, and you know, it's not just peer to peer, but it's a real shortage of, I know that for a lot of the children in our families or older children, there would be such a role that people could play as mentors, and there's so little available, say, for young boys in that area, which I wish there was more support for. And the other thing I was just thinking about this idea of healthy relationships, that in Britain we tend to think of it always in personal terms and not the sort of the community role and citizenship. And, you know, when I think of in Germany, they have the courage schools, the idea of civil courage, which is part of the bystander idea too, that you stand up for what's right and you support others in your community. So not necessarily just the people you know, that we need to keep that broad idea in mind about educating and promoting those ideas to children, so that they also feel that they're part of a community and it's not all about individual to individual connection.
And do you think that all of this should happen within schools or outside schools? I mean, we are sort of starting to inch towards some quite an interesting discussion around the ideas around that. Is that something
I think schools need to be able to connect more with the community. So I think we should be building the connections that can support that, because I don't, like as Ronnie said with the police, you know, you can't do it on your own. We have to build the connections, really.
And who would be the coordinator of that? Would that be a council role? No. So not the school lot. Yeah. You know, it's obviously an interesting discussion around that one. You know, who should be delivering all of this? If you're saying that would be a good idea, wouldn't it? Well, the schools might be overstretched. Oh, maybe the police might be not quite the right person. Oh, the council hasn't got the money. Is it youth services? You know, here we are, sort of thinking, where would it actually best sit? Or should it be a conversation where we bring parents into the room as well, or should it be delivered away from parents? It's a very, and I'm sure we can't resolve this or solve this issue in the next 5 minutes while we have time here together, but it's an interesting thought, at least, of where should something like this sit. Olivia. Sorry.
I was only going to say that Voices has done healthy relationships work with schools, including private schools, which we mustn't forget as well. And I think there is a role for community organisations to come into schools with their particular expertise and training, and thinking also about the language, you know, not putting people off. Talking about abuse and violence can be very difficult. Talking about healthy relationships can be a more accessible way to address what are essentially the same issues.
Tanya, you just have got your hand up. It'd be interesting to hear from you.
Sorry, it's not about this, but I just wanted to bring it up quickly, before I forget and before we move on to anything else. It was just bringing it back to what Alexandria was saying about, you know, getting other people involved. There was just one other point that I just wanted to quickly make about that. It's more constructive than anything else. Is we have had people in the past that have tried to get involved with certain situations that are upstairs, but they've actually interfered with the medic that has been trying to get involved in it. So when you are talking to people about it, just, you know, maybe make sure that they're aware that they are, like, they have had a drink or whatever, you know, they may not be as well qualified as the actual medic that is attending the scene. And once the medic is there, you know, just kind of move it to the side a little bit and let them actually get on with their job that they need to be doing. But I just wanted to bring that up just in case that wasn't already in your plan and it was forgotten about.
No, I think it's important to sort of understand what the bystander role is, and that it is not actually being in the way, but being constructive rather than not. So I think that would probably all be part of that training as a bystander. Olivia, I was wondering whether we've got some more questions from the audience.
Yes, we do, Vera. I mean, there have been comments about violence, comments that members of the audience have experienced violence. Women have experienced violence, men have experienced violence. So violence is obviously sadly, tragically, we've all, it's a factor of our culture. But then I want to build on that with another question. As a cultural change, someone asks, we need to rework how men have conversations with each other. Sometimes calling out friends can be a difficult thing to do. How can we support and educate men to challenge their friends in a productive way?
Can I direct this question to Ronnie, actually, because you're our sort of only guy on the panel, and maybe you're the first to sort of come in here. Ronnie?
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, thanks for spelling that out. Not that I was feeling any awkward anyway already. I think for me, there is a need, especially listening to Alexander, listening to Talia as well, and us on how this whole bystander product could look like. To me, there's a need for having lived experience, for having partnership working to create a product that would work. Because sometimes there's so much culture ingrained in men where we believe some things are acceptable, and you just need that challenge to be told, like, actually, that's not acceptable. And it's moving with the times as well. Like I said, we moved from a time when there's domestic violence, a police officer coming to your house, you can tell them to move off because it's a domestic issue. And it's people understanding that actually laws have changed since then. And it's understanding that, so we need that lived experience in creating these products. Yes, I know it might be difficult to challenge your male colleagues on something that is very stereotyped, but we really need to move past that. If it doesn't sit right, it needs to be challenged, because that whole silence is what breeds that culture. So if you don't do it, then the next person, especially now with policing, I've always used it with Boris, 20,000 new police officers that we've got. We've got a lot of young and service officers coming in. And to me, if we don't challenge that culture, those new officers, that's what they are learning. So we need to be able to have environments where people can challenge each other, and it shouldn't be a taboo to be challenged. We need to create environments, especially for us as leaders, that people that come forward and challenge those cultures, they are protected. So there is that honesty on men, understanding that we don't know everything, understanding that we need to learn, and as leaders, we need to create those environments where people can feel comfortable to challenge.
Talia?
Yeah, I agree with what Ronnie was saying, but oh, hang on.
Yeah, we hear you.
I clicked a button I didn't mean to click. Yeah, so I agree. And thing is, just like from my point of view, like I have a lot of male friends, and like being in this industry, that's kind of a given because there is a lot of males in this industry, and from their point of view, they are very understanding. They're already aware of all of this, and none of them would have any issue with questioning, other colleagues or other people. It's more, don't better use the word, outsiders to the industry that are more worries about questioning their friends, questioning their colleagues. But I think the other thing is that I think we need to make women also realize that they do have a voice in this. They can stand up and they can turn around and say, they can, not aggressively as such, because that kind of is counterintuitive to what we're talking about, but I think we just need to make females aware that they don't have to sit back and think, oh well, he only did this, or he only did that, or he only said this, he only said that. They can turn around and say, actually, no, I don't agree with that, no, I don't like that, no, I don't appreciate it. So I think, as well as educating men on what they can and can't do, I think we should educate females of what they can do and what they can say, and that we need to make them feel that they are able to, because it's being in this industry, it's different. I from like my experiences, I've had to put up with a lot of things, but also equally, I'm more than happy to turn around and say, actually, I don't agree with it, I don't like it. But a lot of girls, especially the younger ones that are coming up through university and things like that, then they're not seeing it that way. So I think it just needs to be a bit a bit of both. You know, men need to be educated on this, but females also need to be educated on that as well.
But so much more important that people like Alexandra sort of do their work and encourage young women to be confident to speak up.
Yes.
And speak with a voice and give voices to those who have become victims, but don't get stuck. I'm sure Ursula would agree, not get stuck for being the victim for the rest of your lives. And that sometimes can take a long time. And therefore, sort of the work that voices are doing is so important to, and you know, what is called the Freedom Project, because for so long and for such a long time, people who have become victims, women, sort of blame themselves. And to get out of that and understand that actually that, you know, women don't have to forever be stuck in that in that feeling of blaming themselves and being free to speak up for themselves. And that's the place to which we have to come. I'm very aware that we're coming to the end of our time. We've got 1 minute left, and I'm also aware of the fact that Alison, you have sort of not directed a particular question at you, for which reason I want to give you maybe the last word of having listened to all of that. You're speaking to so many organizations. What are you taking away from tonight?
So I guess that there's no one answer. And the thing that I think I guess I've been studying or looking into this area for the last 6 months or so more intensively than before, and I think the most helpful thing is for us all to be really, really clear about where the line in the sand is. So we as women need to be really clear where the line in the sand is, and educators need to support everybody to be absolutely clear about it, and the whole thing, you know, enough is enough, it's not okay. I think that the community and the world in general are ready for that message, certainly within our culture, and so I think it's a good moment for us to be much more open about it, and helping everybody to know when it's not okay, and for young women to be able to say it's not okay. So we as older women need to support younger women, I think, to be able to do that as well. So I guess I feel quite positive because finally the agenda seems to be, you know, the lid is off and we're talking about it in a new way. So in lots of ways, I feel quite positive, and I think it's going to take us a while of stumbling around to find exactly what the right answers are. But I'm so encouraged by the work that Sarah Crew, you know, the Chief Constable, and her 2 deputies, all women, all absolutely kind of embedded in this area of work. So I think, you know, Avon and Somerset is going to be probably pioneering in the work that we're going to do in this area. And so all the people on this call who are interested, and all of your speakers, I think it's a great moment. And if you're not already involved, I don't know if there's a way, but I can certainly put you in touch with the people who are leading those kind of different threads of conversation if anybody else wants to get involved in that strategic conversation.
Thank you, Alison. I think that is really all that we have time for. I want to thank everybody who's been on the call, our audience, and particularly our wonderful panel. I think we had so many sort of interesting insights and brought something together as well, of which we can work from and have those conversations and deepen them. And as you say, Alison, probably sort of stumble around a little bit, but at least we're having the conversations, we're creating the networks. I'm very pleased to see that you know, we are coming together. And I want to thank all of you, Dina, Talia, Alexandra, Alison, Ursula, and Ronnie, for being part of tonight's discussion, and hopefully we'll have more of them. Thank you and good night.